Real love is one of the rarest gifts a person can receive. It is patient enough to forgive mistakes, strong enough to stand through difficult seasons, and honest enough to tell the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. Yet one of the greatest tragedies is that people who are consumed by narcissistic patterns often fail to recognize the value of genuine love while they still have it. They become so focused on what they can gain, what they can control, and how others make them feel that they overlook the extraordinary blessing standing right in front of them. By the time they realize what they have lost, the opportunity may already be gone forever. At the beginning of many relationships, a narcissistic person may appear deeply invested. They can be charming, attentive, and incredibly persuasive. They study what the other person longs for and present themselves as the perfect answer. Their words sound convincing, their promises seem sincere, and their affection can feel overwhelming. To someone longing for connection, this attention feels like the beginning of something beautiful. It creates hope that they have finally found someone who truly understands and appreciates. But genuine love is never meant to remain trapped in the excitement of first impressions. Healthy love grows through consistency, honesty, sacrifice, accountability, and mutual respect. It asks both people to mature together. It requires humility, empathy, and the willingness to admit when they are wrong. This is where the relationship often begins to change. Instead of embracing these qualities, a narcissistic person may begin expecting love without offering the same level of care in return. The greatest mistake they make is believing that real love will always stay. Regardless of how they behave, they begin treating loyalty as something automatic instead of something precious. Every act of forgiveness becomes, in their mind, permission to continue harmful behavior. Every second chance convinces them another one will always be waiting. They mistake patience for weakness and kindness for unlimited tolerance. Rather than seeing the incredible strength it takes for someone to keep loving through disappointment, they assume that love has no limits. Over time, they begin taking the relationship for granted. Appreciation slowly disappears. Gratitude is replaced with expectation. Instead of asking, "How can I protect this person's heart?" the focus becomes, "How much more can I receive?" The relationship slowly shifts from partnership to entitlement. The other person's emotional needs become less important, while the narcissistic person's lover's desires remain at the center of every conversation and every decision. Real love, however, is never designed to exist as an endless source of emotional supply. It is a living relationship between two people who both deserve respect. When only one person continues investing emotionally while the other constantly takes, exhaustion eventually replaces hope. The person who once gave everything begins feeling invisible. Their kindness is ignored. Their sacrifices are overlooked. Their emotional pain becomes dismissed or minimized. Yet they continue loving because they believe that someday things will change. Many compassionate people stay far longer than anyone realizes. They remember the wonderful moments from the beginning. They believe the promises that things will improve. They convince themselves that if they just love a little harder, become a little more patient, or try a little longer, the relationship will return to what it once seemed to be. They hold on to hope because hope is part of genuine love. Unfortunately, this hope is often misunderstood. Instead of recognizing it as an incredible gift, the narcissistic person may interpret it as proof that the relationship is unbreakable. They believe their partner will never truly leave. Every apology without lasting change strengthens this false confidence. Every reconciliation convinces them that consequences can always be avoided. Slowly, they begin believing they have complete control over the future of the relationship. This illusion becomes dangerous because it blinds them to reality. They fail to notice the quiet emotional exhaustion growing inside the person who genuinely loved them. They overlook the tears cried in private, the sleepless nights spent wondering if things will ever improve, and the silent prayers for peace. They see the other person's continued presence but fail to recognize the internal struggle that grows stronger with every disappointment. Real love is remarkably resilient, but it is not limitless when respect disappears. There comes a moment when the person who has given everything finally realizes that love cannot survive without reciprocity. They understand that staying is no longer an act of compassion, but an act of self-neglect. The same heart that fought so hard to save the relationship begins choosing to save itself instead. Ironically, this is often the moment the narcissistic person is least prepared for. Because they believed genuine love would always remain available, They never imagined it could permanently walk away. They assumed loyalty meant permanence regardless of their choices. They expected another conversation, another apology, another opportunity to regain what they had lost. What they failed to understand is that every ignored boundary, every broken promise, and every act of emotional neglect quietly moved the relationship closer to its end. One of the deepest ironies is that genuine love was never asking for perfection. It was asking for sincerity. It was asking for growth. It was asking for honesty, accountability, and respect. Most loving people are willing to forgive mistakes. They understand that everyone has flaws. They know relationships require grace and patience. But they also recognize the difference between someone who struggles while genuinely trying to improve and someone who repeatedly causes pain while expecting endless forgiveness. Real love is one of life's greatest opportunities because it offers something impossible to manufacture through manipulation. It provides trust that cannot be demanded, loyalty that cannot be forced, and affection that cannot be bought. These gifts are freely given by someone who chooses to care deeply. Once those gifts are consistently abused, they become increasingly difficult and sometimes impossible to recover. This is why losing real love becomes such a devastating turning point. The relationship itself was never merely about companionship. It represented a rare chance to experience authentic connection built on truth instead of performance. When that opportunity is neglected through selfishness, manipulation, or emotional exploitation, the loss extends far beyond the relationship. It becomes the loss of what may have been the most genuine love they were ever offered. The painful reality is that opportunities rarely announce their value while they are still present. Their importance often becomes clear only after they are gone. Genuine love is like that. It quietly enriches daily life through encouragement, loyalty, forgiveness, laughter, and unwavering support. Those blessings become so familiar that they can seem ordinary until they disappear. By then, no amount of regret can rewind time or restore the trust that was gradually broken through repeated choices. This is an important reminder for everyone, not just those who display narcissistic patterns. Real love should never be treated as something guaranteed. Every relationship deserves gratitude, care, and intentional effort. The people who genuinely stand beside us are not obligations to manage or resources to consume. They are precious individuals whose hearts deserve protection, appreciation, and respect. Those who recognize that truth while love is still present often build relationships that endure. Those who ignore it may someday discover that the greatest gift they ever received quietly walked away, never intending to return. There is a profound difference between someone temporarily walking away and someone leaving with the quiet certainty that they will never return. A narcissistic person often struggles to recognize that difference because they have become accustomed to believing that every ending is only temporary. They expect another opportunity, another conversation, another emotional opening through which they can regain influence. They have watched people forgive them before. They have seen broken trust repaired. They have experienced situations where apologies, promises, charm, or emotional pressure restored relationships that seemed beyond saving. These experiences create a dangerous belief that no matter what happens, there will always be another chance. The true emotional shock begins when they discover that this time is different. The realization rarely arrives all at once. At first, they may dismiss the breakup as another emotional reaction. They assume the other person simply needs time to calm down. They convince themselves that silence is only temporary and that the relationship will soon return to its familiar pattern. Instead of reflecting on their own behavior, they often focus on predicting when the other person will reach out first. Their confidence is built on past experiences where distance eventually ended with reconciliation. Days pass and nothing happens. Then weeks begin to pass. The phone remains silent. Messages go unanswered. Social media offers no emotional reactions to feed their confidence. Mutual friends provide little information. The person who once explained, defended, and fought for the relationship has become unexpectedly peaceful. This unfamiliar silence creates something far more uncomfortable than open conflict. It removes the emotional interaction they relied upon to feel significant. For someone who has relied heavily on control, silence becomes difficult to understand. Arguments could always be manipulated. Tears could be dismissed. Conversations could be redirected. But genuine emotional detachment leaves nothing to negotiate. There are no emotional hooks to pull, no guilt to exploit, and no immediate reactions to influence. For perhaps the first time, they are forced to face a situation where another person's alleged decision exists completely outside their control. Initially, pride often takes over. Rather than admitting loss, they tell themselves the other person is simply trying to prove a point. They may even believe that refusing to respond is part of a game designed to gain attention. Because manipulation has shaped many of their own interactions, they assume everyone else operates from similar motives. They interpret healthy boundaries as temporary strategies instead of permanent decisions. As more time passes, confidence slowly begins to crack. They notice that birthdays come and go without contact. Holidays arrive without familiar conversations. Important life events occur, yet the person who once shared every detail is nowhere to be found. Memories that once seemed ordinary now become painful reminders of someone who has disappeared from their daily life. This is often when denial begins giving way to confusion. Questions they never seriously considered begin surfacing. Why haven't they come back? Why aren't they responding? Why do they seem happier without me? Why isn't anything working the way it always has before? These questions are unsettling because they challenge the belief that they could always restore the relationship whenever they decided the timing was right. The certainty they once carried begins to weaken under the weight of undeniable reality. Some attempt to reestablish contact indirectly. They may send casual messages as though nothing happened. They may pretend to check in out of concern. They may remind the other person of shared memories or important anniversaries. Sometimes they appear unusually kind, patient, or reflective. Other times they provoke conflict simply to receive any response at all. Positive attention or negative attention can both feel preferable to complete silence because silence confirms emotional distance. What surprises them most is not necessarily the lack of reconciliation, but the emotional strength displayed by the person who left. The individual they once believed could never survive without them is now building a peaceful life. They are creating new routines, developing healthier relationships, pursuing personal goals, and discovering confidence that had been buried beneath years of emotional exhaustion. This transformation becomes deeply unsettling because it contradicts the story they believed. They expected dependence. Instead, they witness independence. They expected collapse. Instead, they see growth. They expected endless longing. Instead, they encounter quiet acceptance. For someone accustomed to measuring their worth through influence over others, this represents more than the loss of a relationship. It represents the collapse of an identity built around being emotionally indispensable. The permanent nature of the loss becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. It is no longer about waiting another week or another month. It becomes the realization that certain doors truly close. Trust, once repeatedly broken, cannot always be rebuilt. Love, once consistently neglected, does not always survive. Time, once wasted through repeated cycles of hurt and apology, cannot be recovered. This realization often creates an emotional conflict they have spent years avoiding. Rather than blaming circumstances, they are confronted with the possibility that their own choices played a significant role in the outcome. Every ignored boundary, every broken promise, every dismissive comment, and every moment they prioritize control over compassion now carries greater weight. Regret has a unique way of changing perspective. Actions that once seemed insignificant begin appearing much larger in hindsight. The sarcastic remark they dismissed as harmless. The silent treatment they used to gain control. The repeated refusal to apologize sincerely. The manipulation they justified as necessary. These moments begin connecting into a larger picture they had never fully acknowledged while the relationship still existed. Yet regret alone cannot reverse consequences. One of the hardest truths anyone can face is that some losses become permanent not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the other person has finally learned to protect their own peace. They may no longer carry bitterness or anger. Instead, they carry wisdom. They understand that love without respect eventually becomes suffering. They recognize that compassion should never require sacrificing their emotional well-being indefinitely. This creates an entirely different kind of loss. It is not fueled by dramatic arguments or emotional explosions. It is defined by quiet finality. The person who once waited for change has stopped waiting. The person who once hoped for transformation has accepted reality. Their decision is no longer emotional, it has become intentional. For the narcissistic individual, this permanence can feel almost unimaginable because it removes the possibility of rewriting the story whenever convenient. They are forced to recognize that every relationship has limits, every heart has boundaries, and every opportunity eventually expires if consistently neglected. Perhaps the greatest shock is discovering that genuine love was never weak. They mistook patience for endless endurance. They confused forgiveness with permanent availability. They assumed kindness meant someone would tolerate every disappointment forever. Only after that love disappears do they begin understanding the strength it required for someone to stay as long as they did. The emotional breakdown that follows is rooted not only in loneliness, but also in irreversible reality. They can no longer rely on familiar patterns to restore what has been lost. They cannot recreate years of trust overnight. They cannot erase painful memories with a few carefully chosen words. They cannot simply return to a relationship that has already taught the other person the value of protecting their own heart. The permanent loss of real love becomes a mirror reflecting every ignored opportunity to choose humility over pride, honesty over manipulation, empathy over selfishness, and gratitude over entitlement. It is a realization that arrives too late to change the past, yet clear enough to reveal the immense value of what was once freely given and is no longer theirs to reclaim. One of the greatest misconceptions a narcissistic person often carries is the belief that control is more powerful than connection. They may spend years mastering ways to influence people's emotions, shape their decisions, and maintain the upper hand in relationships. They learn how to create dependency through charm, guilt, fear, praise, criticism, or emotional unpredictability. From the outside, this can appear successful because people stay, comply, apologize, or continue trying to earn approval. Yet beneath the surface, something essential is missing. A relationship built on control may survive for a season, but it can never experience the depth, security, and peace that only genuine connection provides. True connection begins where control ends. It grows through trust, honesty, vulnerability, mutual respect, and emotional safety. Two people become close not because one person holds power over the other, but because both willingly choose to share their lives without fear of manipulation. Real intimacy cannot be demanded. It cannot be forced through pressure or maintained through intimidation. It exists only when both hearts feel free to be authentic. For someone who relies on narcissistic behaviors, this kind of openness can feel unfamiliar or even threatening. Vulnerability requires admitting weakness, accepting responsibility, and recognizing the emotional needs of another person. Those who are deeply invested in maintaining an image of superiority often avoid these experiences because they fear losing control. Instead of allowing relationships to develop naturally, they attempt to manage every emotional interaction to ensure that attention, admiration, and influence always remain in their favor. At first, this approach can seem effective. If someone feels guilty enough, they may stay. If someone fears abandonment, they may work harder to please. If someone constantly seeks approval, they may ignore their own needs to preserve the relationship. These responses create the illusion of success. The narcissistic individual believes they have built a strong relationship because the other person remains present. What they fail to recognize is that physical presence does not always mean emotional or layered closeness. A person can remain in a relationship while silently feeling lonely. They can smile while carrying deep sadness. They can continue giving love while privately grieving the relationship they hoped would exist. They may appear committed on the outside while slowly becoming emotionally disconnected. Within, control may keep someone nearby, but it cannot make them feel cherished, understood, or emotionally safe. This distinction becomes increasingly important as time passes. Every healthy relationship requires moments of honesty. There are conversations about disappointment, forgiveness, unmet expectations, and personal growth. These discussions strengthen connection because they allow both people to understand one another more deeply. But when control becomes the priority, honest conversations are often replaced with defensiveness, blame, or emotional manipulation. Imagine someone expressing hurt after feeling ignored. Instead of listening with empathy, the narcissistic person shifts the conversation toward their own feelings, denies responsibility, minimizes the pain, or accuses the other person of being overly sensitive. The original concern never receives genuine attention. The issue becomes winning the conversation rather than healing the relationship. Over months or years, this pattern creates emotional distance. The loving partner slowly learns that expressing vulnerability rarely results in understanding. Instead of feeling heard, they feel dismissed. Instead of feeling valued, they feel invisible. They begin withholding thoughts and emotions because every attempt at openness seems to create more conflict instead of greater closeness. Meanwhile, the narcissistic individual may misinterpret this silence as proof that everything is improving. Fewer disagreements seem like fewer problems. In reality, the opposite is often true. The relationship is not becoming healthier, it is becoming quieter because one person has stopped believing their voice matters. Control thrives in silence. Connection thrives in communication. These two approaches cannot coexist for long because they are built upon completely different foundations. Another reason control fails to replace connection is that control depends on constant maintenance. It requires ongoing manipulation, emotional monitoring, and strategic behavior. The narcissistic person must continually protect their image, defend against criticism, and maintain influence over how others perceive them. This creates a relationship filled with tension because every interaction becomes part of a larger effort to preserve power. Connection requires something entirely different. It allows people to relax. There is no need to calculate every word or anticipate every emotional reaction. Both individuals know they are accepted even when they disagree. They trust that difficult conversations will strengthen rather than destroy the relationship. This emotional safety creates peace that manipulation can never produce. Ironically, the more someone attempts to control another person, the less genuine affection they actually receive. Compliments become uncertain because they may be motivated by fear. Acts of kindness become difficult to interpret because they may simply be attempts to avoid conflict. Loyalty loses its meaning because it may exist only to prevent emotional consequences. Even expressions of love become questionable because they are no longer freely chosen. This uncertainty creates an invisible emptiness. The narcissistic person may receive attention every day while secretly wondering whether anyone truly loves them. Deep inside, they often crave authentic acceptance, yet their own controlling behaviors prevent them from experiencing it. They construct emotional walls to protect themselves, but those same walls also block the very intimacy they desire. Real love cannot flourish where freedom disappears. Love is meaningful precisely because it is voluntary. Every hug, every encouraging word, every act of forgiveness carries value because it is freely given. The moment someone feels emotionally trapped, obligated, or manipulated, love gradually transforms into duty. Duty may preserve appearances, but it cannot nourish the human heart. Eventually, the loving partner begins recognizing this reality. They understand that they have spent more time managing another person's soothing emotions than sharing life together. Instead of feeling like an equal partner, they feel responsible for maintaining peace at any personal cost. They carefully choose words, suppress opinions, and avoid honest conversations simply to prevent conflict. This is not connection. It is emotional survival. The longer this pattern continues, the more exhausted they become. They realize that relationships should not require constant fear, anxiety, or self-abandonment. They begin rediscovering forgotten parts of themselves, their confidence, their opinions, their dreams, and their emotional needs. Little by little, they remember what it feels like to exist without constantly seeking someone else's approval. When they finally choose to leave, the narcissistic individual often struggles to understand why. From their perspective, everything seemed under control. They believed the relationship remained secure because they still influenced many aspects of it. What they overlooked was the complete absence of genuine emotional connection. Control convinced someone to stay. Connection would have inspired them to remain willingly. That difference changes everything. Once real connection is lost, no amount of control can recreate it. Demands cannot rebuild trust. Guilt cannot restore affection. Grand gestures cannot erase years of emotional neglect if they are not supported by sincere transformation. Genuine intimacy grows slowly through consistent respect, empathy, accountability, and mutual care. It cannot be manufactured in moments of panic after someone has already walked away. Perhaps the deepest tragedy is that authentic connection was available all along. It never required perfection. It only required honesty, humility, compassion, and the willingness to value another person's heart as much as one's own. These qualities may seem ordinary, but they form the foundation of every lasting relationship. In the end, control always reaches its limit because people eventually recognize the pause between being managed and being loved. Hearts may tolerate manipulation for a season, but they were created to thrive in freedom, respect, and genuine connection. The relationships that endure are not those where one person possesses the most power. They are the ones where both individuals feel equally safe to be seen, heard, valued, and loved without fear. That is something control can imitate for a while, but it can never truly replace.